Yes equals no. This sounds absurd, but it's actually very common in East Asia and core to its culture. First, East Asians have a pretty extreme aversion to saying no. Just look at articles like Ueda's listing 16 ways to say no in Japanese without actually ever saying the word. There are also some long-standing cultural factors in East Asia that make saying yes an accepted way to mean no. In fact, the rabbit hole goes much deeper than just yes meaning no, so stick until the end if you want to see how far this contradiction goes. But I know claiming yes equals no sounds crazy, so let's start with some examples, some of which you might actually be familiar with. Some popular methods as proposed by Yamai are saying no by saying yes. For example, hey, are you coming clubbing tomorrow? Yeah, I do need to take care of my frog though. He's traveling the world right now and I just need to be at home for when he comes back. Oh, okay. See? You didn't say no, in fact you said yes, but really you mean no. Okay, if that's too much, Yamai says you can also imply no by being really vague or by changing the subject of the question. Hey, clubbing tomorrow? Dude, do you ever think about why people go to the clubs though? Like, before dating apps, it feels like people went to the clubs to find a date, but now it just feels like people go there to disassociate. Okay. Or look, you don't even have to entertain them with a response, you can just evade. Hey, clubbing? Ah! Got it. I knew I heard something just then. Alright, at this point, I know someone is thinking, just tell them if you don't want to go. Well, if only things could be that easy. But that's the whole point of this video. We're going to look at why saying no is so hard in East Asia, what kind of strategies have evolved given this culture, and how you might be able to tell next time if someone really means the yes they gave you, or if they're just saying it. To start, we have to break down this phenomenon of avoiding no, and it really comes down to two things. Let's talk about the art of politeness and the importance of face. Why is saying no so hard? Aside from some of us being innate people pleasers, saying no is hard because this response usually contradicts with the expectations of the asker. No one is ever going to ask for something expecting to be turned down, so they've come to you, and now you have to let them down. Even if you have a valid reason, saying no can still suck. How much it sucks though is dependent on a lot of factors, like how close you are with them, what sort of relationship you have, what kind of person they are, the size of the imposition, whether you're turning down a big ask or a small thing, and some other factors that probably have more weight in East Asia, like their rank, are they your senior, are they older than you, and if you are in a position to say no, taking into consideration social hierarchies, expectations, and possible consequences depending on the context. We'll talk more about these cultural factors later because this has evolved a lot of the strategies in saying no. But I want to walk us through what happens when we turn someone down. Because saying no is an act of refusal, it's also known as a face-threatening act. You don't want to make someone lose face or make them feel embarrassed or hurt when you reject an invitation to hang or reply that you can't help them out with what they're asking. Because of this, we have to be more considerate in how we deliver our refusals. This consideration really is just being polite. In fact, Brown and Levinson defined politeness as a complex system for softening face-threatening acts. Politeness can range from a simple and direct no thank you to all those examples we had at the beginning where no wasn't even mentioned in the response. In these latter cases, it's a very deliberate way to preserve face for the other person, and it's also very indirect. These elaborate soft rejections are intricately designed to reflect the other person's age, rank, and seniority, all of which would impact the level of politeness deemed appropriate in East Asian interactions. This link is highlighted by Cyril as he says, politeness is the chief motivation for indirectness. East Asian societies are also quite hierarchical, and they place a strong emphasis on maintaining group harmony. Given this context, if you've decided to say no, this decision already kind of upsets the group harmony. So it's really on you now to express the sentiment in a non-threatening, even flattering way, depending on how senior the other person might be. Really, you just want to make sure the other person doesn't lose face. In politeness theory, face can be positive and negative, and this is relevant in any social situation. Positive face is our desire to be appreciated, validated, and liked. It's tied to our self-esteem. If you wanted to appeal to this whilst asking for a favor, you could say, "Could you help me with the assignment, please? You're the smartest in our class and you know the most on this topic." Flattery does wonders in appealing to positive face. Then you have negative face, which concerns our freedom to do what we want. In order to be considerate of this, when you ask someone for a favor, favor, you could slip in words to make the request seem less of a burden, like, hey, can I ask you a little question? Or show that you're being mindful of their time by saying, I'm sorry to bother, but blah blah blah. In rejecting someone, we can keep in mind the same two basic ones. You can appeal to positive face by turning down an event saying, that sounds like it would be a great time, however, I can't make it. You can also speak to negative face referring to yourself. I would lend you money, but I'm in a bind too, so I can't help you. The next reason for why yes means no has to do with power. We mentioned East Asia having a more hierarchical structure in society, so these are cultures which we would say have a high power distance. Power distance refers to how accepted it is that there will be an unequal distribution of power. In East Asia, people accept this difference in power as a result of seniority or age, and they will be quite conscious of behaving according to where they are in the hierarchy. In Japanese, the social norms you would follow in order to be properly polite is called wakimae. Following wakimae influences how you would speak to someone, which would then naturally include how you refuse someone. And we can imagine saying no to someone who is higher up in the hierarchy would be harder than saying no to your sibling or friends. Maciejewski did a study on this as he asked Japanese respondents who they struggled with saying no to the most, and the most common answer was their boss. In fact, the two respondents who didn't answer with their boss hadn't yet entered the workforce, and they instead said refusing their upperclassmen was the hardest. One respondent elaborates on this situation. In a Japanese company, for example, you have to obey your boss. We have this kind of culture. If I refuse an invitation, I will feel anxiety. I'm afraid they might not invite me again. And this anxiety of the consequences from saying no could explain why most Japanese respondents refuse their boss with a response like this. I'm terribly sorry, but I've made another plan for that day a long time ago. So I'm very sorry, but I'll have to say no to your wonderful invite. Compare this to how American respondents would refuse their boss, appealing again to that positive face and beginning with, that would be wonderful, before expressing their regret of not being able to make it. The work culture in Japan, with its strong hierarchies, power distance, and emphasis on group harmony, could have led to Japanese respondents being more apologetic in turning down their boss, whilst weaker workplace hierarchies and a more equal distribution of power in the West may have allowed American speakers to open more positively and even talk more informally in turning down the same invite. Soft rejection therefore becomes a life skill in East Asia. So because of East Asian countries valuing face, prioritizing group harmony, and in having a considerable power distance, you get an environment where yes becomes no, and a whole bunch of other refusal strategies to boot. Here are the 16 ways we'd have put forward saying no. I won't go through all of them, but feel free to pause and take a look. Although I really think some of these would do more harm than good. Like if I ever asked someone to hang out and they pulled a number 7 and left the room, I would quite literally never recover. You can just bury me in the room you left me in. East Asia has many cultural expectations of how one should act or respond that is fitting of their role within society and their relationship with others. I go into the cultural context in more depth on my last video, but a major influence is Confucian philosophy, which emphasized virtues such as respect and outlined clear social hierarchies that are still relevant today. With these cultural expectations then of how one should act in East Asia fitting of their role, what happens when we have intentions that go against that? Saying yes when we want to say no is a pretty specific example of this conflict. More generally, it's common for East Asians to say one thing and for it to not reflect what they're actually thinking at all. But that's not the only example of what you see not aligning with what you get. And this is actually a true story. I booked a hotel from a major traveling website, and the night before I check in, I get a message from the official app saying I need to confirm my credit card details with them or my booking will get cancelled. So I follow the link to confirm my details. But as I try to pay, my bank sends me a verification text, which I actually wasn't able to receive because I was overseas and I had a different SIM card. The payment doesn't go through because I couldn't successfully verify, and so through sheer dumb luck, I avoid getting scammed. But I wouldn't recommend this strategy. What do I wish I did differently? A, not panic, because that's how scammers get you. And B, because that's easier said than done, I wish I had Guardio installed so I wouldn't be vulnerable to these situations designed to pressure and corner you into making bad decisions. threats. Gario comes in really clutch here. It's a cross-platform security solution that acts as a first line of defense, constantly scanning for threats with every move you make and blocks anything malicious that comes your way. Gario automatically scans and blocks bad links in emails and will alert you if anything in the email is fishy. It blocks bad links, phishing attempts, and fake websites, no matter the source of them. Gario also blocks malware and dangerous downloads. With one account, you can have 5 family members on it so everyone is protected. When our laptops and phones hold so much personal information of ours, it's important we keep it secure. And like the travel scam that I encountered, sometimes hackers are scary good, and as vigilant as you may be, you can still make mistakes. In my opinion, don't risk it because it's so stressful when you end up with a big financial loss. You can try out Gario for a free 7-day trial and get 20% off their monthly subscription fee using my link at guard.io/aini. Thank you to Gario for sponsoring this video, and I genuinely hope none of you guys ever get scammed. Excluding the scam of East Asians saying yes, yes, when they really mean no. I fear that one is just inevitable. Like I said, it's common for East Asians to say one thing and really mean another, and refusals are only the tip of the iceberg here. In Japanese, there are 2 words that perfectly delegate the divide between what we think and what we say, and it captures how this might actually be in conflict. That is honne and tatemae. Honne describes our true feelings, whereas tatemae is what we show in public. You might not want to go to an event, that's honne, but if you say you'll try your best to attend, that's tatemae. Or maybe you bump into someone that you haven't seen in a while, and after some small talk, you both say, we should totally hang out. If this were 2 Asians talking, there's a 95% chance that they're not going to follow through on that. Being able to discern intent from what's actually being said is therefore really important in understanding East Asian culture. Because East Asians prioritize face, the words that are being spoken out loud cater for the feelings of the other person rather than what one might actually think. Because of this discrepancy in what is said and what is meant, East Asian cultures are known as high context cultures. This term was first introduced by Hall in 1976 in exploring how different cultures communicate. Hall describes high context cultures as one in which most of the info is either in the physical context or internalized in the person, where very little is in the coded, explicit, transmitted part of the message, which means the real meaning of what people say is often not in the words. It's something you pick up on through shared values, from knowing the person, or from physical cues around you. As high context cultures rely on social cues more, a good communicator is one who is able to read the room. Words like nunchi and kukiwa yomu highlight exactly this trait of being able to read between the lines when it comes to forming and maintaining relationships. And since we have high context cultures, we also have low context cultures, and Hall defines low context cultures as where the mass of the information is vested in the explicit code. So most of the information that the other person wants to say will be made explicit and told to you. A good communicator in a low context culture is someone who expresses what they feel and think, because you shouldn't expect someone else to read your mind. If you're curious about what kind of culture your country has, this is Hall's classification, which is very debated upon by scholars since Hall hasn't provided any quantitative processes for how he determined the ranking. So just a heads up, many scholars have called this out for being anecdotal. But if you see your country, let me know. Do you agree with which side it's on? Hall's dimension of high and low context cultures remains very influential despite the criticism with the ranking of countries. One thing to point out though is that collectivism and individualism often coincides with the high and low context distinction, which is interesting and also makes a lot of sense because collectivist cultures place more emphasis on the relationships you hold with other people. So to prioritize those relationships, you might say things you don't always mean. Conversely, individualist cultures place more emphasis on oneself. So it could foster a preference for more direct communication instead of always beating around the bush. I think we're starting to see now that good communication will vary depending on cultural backgrounds. Ge and Park did a fascinating study looking into the kind of communication different cultures prefer. An example of a scenario they gave the respondents were, your partner has developed a habit that you do not like and you want to address the issue with him or her. How would you go about communicating? Participants were then given a range of actions from telling them as clearly as possible to finding an opportunity to gently bring it up with them, expecting that they would get their point. Ge and Park found that Chinese respondents preferred indirect communication regardless of the situation balance, and European Americans preferred direct methods of communication more compared to Chinese respondents. Most Most importantly, when respondents were asked about imagining their partner's communication style in which they would anticipate greater relationship satisfaction, Chinese respondents imagined a more indirect communication style, whilst European American respondents imagined a more direct communication style. I do want to add a little bit more nuance to our discussion at the moment though, because I don't want the takeaway to be East Asia equals indirect communication equals never expressing how you feel. To provide more depth here, let's take a look at the concept of amae in Japan. Like many cultural concepts, it's hard to translate, but it's commonly viewed as dependency and indulgence. And amae will allow us to understand why we can't just assume East Asians always communicate indirectly. This bullseye graph holds the answer. This model is Tezuka's 1986 conceptualization of amae, and she proposes two sides to amae, which then leads to different forms of communication. At the core of any interaction is, according to Tezuka, this bullseye here, which has our need for oneness and belonging. Then this next ring on the left is our dependence need, born from our need of wanting to know if others will be there for us. Amae therefore facilitates communicating with enryo and sashi, which is communicating indirectly. On the right, again stemming from this need of oneness, we have the acceptance need, which is our desire to be accepted by others despite all our failures, mistakes, and weaknesses. And it's here that amae actually serves to facilitate a more direct communication style. Mike elaborates on Tezuka's model. As he explains, amae shows up as dependence, resulting in an indirect style of speech when we talk to strangers, acquaintances, and those of higher status because we don't know if they will meet our need of being there for us. So we ask in an indirect way, and if they were to reject us, it would also be done indirectly. Otherwise, if we're too direct with what we're asking, it could make the other person uncomfortable. And if they're too direct with their response, especially if it's a refusal, that could hurt us. Amae, however, manifests as indulgence with family, close friends, and people we do know well, and this results in more direct communication because we trust that we can state our feelings and intentions and that they will stick by us even if there's conflict or if we behave poorly. You have Japanese students, as quoted by Mike, saying, amae doesn't work abroad. You have to say everything. Compare this to Maynard's observation of conflict in Japanese culture. Confrontations often occur among close friends, where the amae relationship is well established. Amae is referred in such different ways because they were actually talking about two manifestations of it. One that prohibited direct speech and one that facilitated it. I know I could have said East Asians would talk indirectly with people they don't know and directly with people they do know, but it's not the same. One last point I want to highlight as well is this need for dependency. I want to call this out because it's actually viewed quite differently in the East versus the West. In the West, dependency is often seen as a threat to autonomy, whereas in the East, it's encouraged and is actually viewed as a necessary part of relationships. You can see this difference in how kids would often move out in the West by 18, but it's common for Asian kids to continue living with their family throughout their 20s. Dependency isn't seen as an obligation as it might be perceived in the West. Rather, in the East, it's more of a warm feeling of commitment. Another example would be how in the West, you'd often split the bill evenly, with everyone paying their dues so there's no obligation between anyone. Compare this to Asian practices of saying, oh, I got this, you can get it next time. This view of knowing that there is a next time and that you're both depending and reciprocating off each other makes the obligation feel warm. I just realized this video could give people trust issues. This is obviously not the intention, and I probably need to emphasize here that at the end of the day, East Asians saying yes when they mean no is usually an act out of respect for you and consideration for the group dynamic. And East Asians do communicate directly too, as I mentioned, though saying what's really on their mind is more reserved for people they're very close to. When I told my mom I was first planning to make this video, she actually laughed because this soft rejection to preserve face is such a big part of East Asian culture, but it's not something everyone is aware of. I hope this video was insightful in showing how different types of communication styles might be valued. Let me know in the comments what you thought was most interesting. I personally love the distinction of high and low context cultures. It's really simple, but I also feel like it explains so much. Finally, a big shout out to my patrons. I post exclusive bonus commentary there, and you can check it out for free at this link. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Please subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!
Like every time I was recording, my hand is just in like a Lego clam shape.